Hey, greetings everybody. Welcome to the Labor Movement Essay Prompt lecture series. So the overarching prompt is we'll be looking at, you'll be discussing and defining the various phases of the development of the labor movement from the 1860s to 1955. Now that time frame, 1860 to 1955, that just constitutes a time frame for purposes of our class. It doesn't constitute the entire labor movement. The labor movement is still going on in many respects. In your discussion, demonstrate how the philosophy of social Darwinism impeded the labor movement. So you'll have to have your notes handy for from social Darwinism, the lecture we looked at last time. It's also important to show how tensions between capital and labor led to industrial conflict and the results of that conflict. All right, so before we get started with concept one, this is what this link is dedicated to, but I wanted just to do a little mind activity just for purposes of notes, and we'll expand more on this in class because there's a lot to talk about when it comes to the labor movement and a lot to think about when it comes to the labor movement. In the essay, we're just touching on kind of the overarching political themes of the labor movement, but there was a real human element to the labor movement that we need to keep in mind as we're just going through the basic history of this very important strain in our nation's history. So in as much detail as possible, please write down any thoughts, ideas, or historical analysis that come to mind when looking at the image, so this image here, and the Mother Jones quote. So this quote right here. So just take a few minutes just to look at the picture. Let me read the quote to you. We are told that every American boy has the chance of being president. I tell you that these little boys in the iron cages would sell their chance any day for good square meals and a chance to play. So that comes from a labor activist and organizer, Mother Jones, also known as Mary Harris Jones. Very interesting individual within the labor movement that we'll take a little bit more look at when we're in class. Take a look at the image you see there, and just write down anything that comes to mind as you're looking at it. Anything that you can connect to and from the assigned readings, from previous lectures. See what's going on there. Just to write down your thoughts, and then in class we'll talk about more of this later. All right, so concept one. Discuss the division within the labor movement and show how labor had a hard time adjusting to industrial capital. So it's important to understand in the years after the Civil War, two rival approaches fought for the allegiance of the American working class. You had radical unionism and you had trade unionism. So after labor failed to achieve satisfactory adjustment to industrial capitalism during the years following the Civil War, largely because it was unable to act as a unit, a single block, or to agree upon three issues, which would be the nature of the problem, the proper objective, and the instrument of action. So right from the get-go, as the Industrial Revolution is really coming into full swing following the Civil War, the Second Industrial Revolution, labor is just swapped by this huge change in society. It's probably very hard to appreciate because we're just kind of used to, we live in this post-industrial society, but it was a very angst-ridden time. And so this table here that you see in front of you basically is just describing the differences between the two approaches towards the labor movement and what and how they approached it. Sorry, my phone was ringing. So you have the radical unions. The nature of the problems for the radical unions was the corporate capitalist system, right? So the American worker was beset by not just capitalism. A lot of these people in the radical unionists are anti-capitalist. A lot of them are socialists, Marxists, or communists. But it's not necessarily capitalism per se. It's the type of capitalism that has immersed itself as center to the American economy post-Civil War to this very second. The corporate capitalist system, which is very much with us to this day. So that's the problem for radical union members and organizers. The proper objective for radical union members and organizers is to, reject the corporate capitalist system, right? Just get rid of it. How do we do that? The instrument of action passes appeal to reason, generally speaking. Not always, but generally speaking, which would just mean you just need to educate the workers, right? Have them read some history, have them read their Karl Marx, perhaps. Karl Marx was becoming quite popular within the labor movement. And just discuss and figure out how, through reason, obviously it's quite reasonable that if this is the problem, we get rid of it. We can just appeal to people's reasons and the problems will be solved. Mother Jones once said, "Shut up, sit down, and educate yourself for the coming conflicts." Trade unionism. Trade unionism is basically the unions that we have today. Radical unions exist, but they're more nominal than practical these days. Trade unionism is basically the unions that exist today. The nature of the problem for the trade unions was management, the boss, right? So we're not going to get rid of corporate capitalist system. It's like rock and roll. It's here to stay, right? So we have to talk to management. We have to negotiate with management, right? The proper objective is to adjust, right? So we're not going to reject corporate capitalism. It's not going anywhere. So we need to bring management to the table, right? So we might have problems with working conditions, pay, the work week. We might want to shorten the work week as members of whatever particular union we're looking at. And how do you do that? You talk to management and you adjust, you negotiate. How are you going to get management's attention? Well, the most effective instrument of action, striking, right? So hit management where it hurts. If the workers leave the factory, if the workers leave the coal mine, if the workers leave whatever place of work they're at, the campus, like all the teachers go on strike, right? Somebody is going to have to sit down with those workers and see what it takes to get them back to work, right? And so sometimes it was effective, sometimes it was not very effective. For many, many years, it proved not to be effective. But ultimately, striking is what really got attention, not only just of management, but also later of the U.S. federal government. And it worked with both management and labor to try to find some sort of common ground. So it's important to understand that throughout the 19th century and well into the 20th, labor debated whether to accept or reject capitalism, and whether to trust laissez-faire, hands-off, is what it means, government hands-off, and try to make it on their own or seek government patronage. Later they would, ultimately they would seek government patronage. Machinery made enormous savings in manufacturing and a vast increase in productivity, but only a small portion of these savings were passed on to labor in forms of wages. Now, it's estimated workers' purchasing power increased nearly 40% between 1850 and 1880. However, labor argued it was not getting its fair share of the fruits of industrial growth. Instead, the rich were just simply getting richer and the poor poorer. As machinery came to represent a large part of capital investment, it was thought necessary to have the worker adjust to the machinery rather than have the machinery adjust to the worker. Thus, if efficiency required that machines run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, workers were expected to adjust themselves to those requirements, regardless of the social undesirability of such a schedule. The steel industry, for example, had a 12-hour day and 7 days a week. The schedule was largely maintained for workers until about 1923. Right, so you can imagine what kind of life one would have working 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days, right? If you didn't like it, well, there were thousands upon thousands of people that would take your place in a second, because times were tough. The change from individual employer to impersonal corporation sharply lessened the workers' bargaining power. So this is an important concept to understand here, how the workers' needs, demands, basic ideas are rapidly being diminished as the Industrial Revolution is marching on. When machines took the place of handicrafts and skilled labor, jobs become monotonous. Mechanization undermined both the craftsman's pride and his bargaining power. The old familiar relations between employer and employee were passing. So, a few generations before the Industrial Revolution, the boss had known every person in his shop, because in the small establishment, there had been a friendly human relationship between employer and employee. I mean, they might have lived in the same neighborhood or close to the same neighborhood. They might have gone even to the same church. Their kids might have gone to the same schools, right? So you would have known your boss, and your boss would have known you, and it would have been an interpersonal relationship. As the Industrial Revolution was in full throttle, that relationship is disintegrating. That idea of the relationship is disintegrating. There was no such relationship between the great mines or steel producers who controlled the coal industry and the 150,000 men who worked in the mines. So as a result of industrialization and the rapid growth of the industrialized workforce, the problem of a lost identity within society for a large number of workers developed. Sometimes this is known as alienation. You feel alienated from your work, you feel alienated from the people that you work for, and from the products that you produce. If anyone's ever worked in a factory system and an assembly line, very much knows what alienation feels like. You are just a part of the machine. Years ago, I worked in a fish processing factory, and my job was to cut off fish's heads. And I did that for 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, for 3 weeks straight. Made a lot of money, but it was an interesting experience, because that's what I was. I just was part of the machine. A fish would come by and decapitate it with this kind of like guillotine machine, and pass off the fish carcass to be filleted by the next person in the assembly line. And indeed, I lost complete identity of who I was during that process. I was 18, 19, so it wasn't too bad. But and I got a nice check after the whole process. But and it was just 3 weeks. Now, keep in mind, people, their whole careers were dedicated to such existence. 7 days a week, 12 hours a day, doing one thing over and over and over again for basically their entire adult lives. So consequently, under these conditions, the individual became less significant. Labor unions, appealing to the individual as a person, fulfilled the workers' needs to work within a group or a union. And again, we have two schools of thoughts here: radical unionism or trade unionism. And then we'll get, in the next concept, we'll get in more detail about what a radical union was and what a trade union was. Anyway, that's going to conclude concept 1. Let me know if you have any questions, concerns. You can either email me or talk to me in class if you're in one of my face-to-face classes. All right, talk to you guys later. See you in unit or concept 2. Bye.